Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me this morning for our lesson number 7 Q&A Zoom meeting here. And yeah, this is a bit of a tricky lesson that we're going to go through this morning, or potentially tricky, just from a graphical point of view. So without further ado, let us take a look at the lesson that's in front of us, and we'll go from there. Just get my ducks in a row here. All right. So this is lesson number 7 and has 2 parts. And as we can see, there's the local ecological survey. It's worth 4 points, and then the site cross sections worth 10. So you can tell just by the marks being awarded here that most of your time and energy will be going into that second part, the site cross section. We are going to go through a few examples here, which I didn't bring up, but I will. And yeah, and then take a look. I'll show you a cross section that my wife and myself did. It's a little bit different than what you're asked to do, but you can definitely see the visualization that comes with it and how nice that is. So really, we go from this 2D overhead view of our drawing or our site, a project site, into more of it's not really 3D, it's just more of a side view. So, but let's start out with the ecological survey, it's a local ecological survey. And what we're asking you to do there is actually probably a good idea just to bring the template file up, and we'll go to that part. Okay, there we go. So there's a few steps in the process here. With the local ecological survey, we're asking you to, sort of take this format and fill in the blanks, so to speak. And this succession is shown here. And we want you to try and identify where your project site might be in terms of its succession. And it's a really healthy exercise because let's say that you discovered that your project site is very early in its succession stage. So it has been recently disturbed, and you are trying in your design, you are designing for, say, something like this. Here, I'll get my little highlighter tool going. This right here, where you have a mixtures of trees and shrubs and herbaceous plants. And this seems a long way away from where it is. And that is quite right. There are, that is really valuable information to have, where you are and where you want to go. And that can really aid you in your design and implementation, where you know that this early succession also comes with, that's also a reflection of the soil organisms. So if we have a recently disturbed site, we know that the organisms that once supported, say, a mature forest, or even a forest that was on its way, all those soil organisms are going to be either disturbed, or they've gone into dormancy, or they have been killed off because their food source is gone and their habitat's been annihilated, right? So because of that, we need to think about how we can make improvements to that soil to help our new plant material thrive in that environment. And it's not as hard as it sounds. Um, Probably the key thing here that it boils down to is really high quality compost and supporting the that ecological soil community as much as possible. So that's how I look at this exercise, is looking at what's above ground and knowing that that reflects what's below ground. Um, Without going into it too much, I have taken some courses with Dr. Elaine Ingham on the soil food web, and which is a fascinating subject. And basically, all soils want to be in this old growth or late stage. That's where if I walked away from my property today, which is sort of acreage with some open areas, and just let it be, it's going to revert back to this. And that's the wonderful thing about our ecology and the world we live in, is that nature has these tools to fix disturbance. Um, Now, there may be a point that we hit where that is not the case. So if I guess an example of that might be in the Middle East, where the Nile Valley, that whole basin was once a fertile forest, and it was disturbed, and agriculture began, and now it's desert. So nature has a tough time pulling that back from where it is, but it took a lot to push it into that um, point of succession. So, and that is in a fragile environment where we live on the west coast of North America here, or predominantly. We have a few students elsewhere, and I think Wilfred, you're in Africa, so we are not in a fragile um, climate. If again, if you walk away, it's amazing how much growth will happen without any intervention from our end. So that's how I read this succession. So it is a great exercise to go through. Where is your site in this circle here? And for some of you, that'll be very easy. For urban sites, you tend to be kind of in that early succession state, and some larger acreage sites might have a blend. You might have some nice zone 5 old growth, or second growth forest like we have on our property. But there are also some cleared areas that you're trying to grow vegetables in, and they typically need early succession. So I won't go on ad nauseum about that slide, but we also want to add 3 pioneer plants that are in your local ecology. They may not be on your site, but they're in your area, and those are very interesting. And yeah, so that's a really good indicator too. If you walk onto a client's project site and you see pioneers, you know that these pioneers are trying to heal what's been done to that soil or the land. Yeah, so that is a little bit about that. And of course, we have an example right beside here that you can take a look at. Oh, excuse me a second. Okay, so let's go to our next slide here. So here we're going to look at bird species, and that's pretty straightforward. These are very interesting for me, just in that it's amazing how widespread some species of birds are, because we get an awful lot of activity on our property, and then seeing the same birds down in Oregon or Northern California is quite fascinating. We also want to look at the local food chain. So how do the nutrients move through the system? And that is showing us here. And then we have our SWOT analysis and any feedback or questions you might have. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Does anybody... Oh, there we got a question perhaps. Oh, no, Kevin has put a great resource up on the chat there for birds. Excellent. So that might really help people that are not as familiar with some of the well, the tricky part about the birds, of course, is not just the common name, but you want to get the botanic or the Latin name, sorry. So we want both of those, and then a little bit of detail about them. So thanks for that, Kevin. That looks great. All right. Do we have anybody have any questions about that section? I think it's fairly straightforward, and you can tell by the first slide there, you could go quite deep in terms of your research with this. But this is a really powerful tool. And this is part of reading the landscape, right? So even just knowing what pioneer plants are locally in your area, that can really help. As you see more and more project sites, you know, certain things are going to jump out at you. So the next, let's go back up to the assignment here. So it's going to go through basically what we have discussed here. So also, sometimes we get a little bit of confusion about the climax community. And here are some examples of that. I would say for most of the people in this class, we're going to be looking at coniferous forests that are coastal. I know where I live on the east coast of Vancouver Island. Basically, my climax community would be the coastal Douglas fir forest. That's pretty much the dominant tree where I am, but depending where you are, could be quite a wide range of possibilities there. So the pioneer plants, again, are also a good thing to recognize. And it's actually quite shocking to read. I was quite surprised to find out that Douglas fir was one of those pioneer plants, which quite surprised me. I know that things like red alder are. There are many others, bracken, all sorts of different items there. But so yeah, that is a very interesting little part of the exercise to go through. And we also want you to describe the types of disturbance that you witness on the site, both human, ecologically. So that's also helpful by birds and that food chain. So I think that's pretty straightforward. And if there's no questions on that, we will go to the next part, which is a little trickier, and we will look at the cross-section drawing here. So in this situation, we are first doing the plan view. So when the plan view is that overhead view that we would get either through Google Earth or your base map or that sort of thing, you definitely want to include why it was chosen, right? And we'll just flip back and forth here. So with the plan view, what we want to do, and it should have an example here. Yes. So this is a previous student's plan view. That's a nice base plan with contour information. And they've drawn a line. And they've put an A on one end and a B on the other. And that is important because this cross section really is going to represent us if you were to slice into the landscape. If you were going to slice into the landscape and tip that land up on edge, what would it look like? So it gives us, you know, as much of a 3D view as we can ask for, but it's just in this location. Now, if we have an A and B on both ends of the line, What that does is that's going to tell us from which side of the line we're looking at the cut. And that can make a big difference on obviously what you're going to see. So that is an important part of the whole here. And then we are going to ask you to insert that cross-section view in the slide here and any other relevant information. And this could be, this, well, I'm not sure what's going on with my device here. I'm going to switch to another one. Sorry about that. There we go. So that could be a really good example of a section view, and it looks like it's the same example we looked at in the previous slide. So here is A and here is B, and then this person has added some images at these specific points on the drawing. So that's pretty cool. And then we have our A and our B at the bottom of the cross-section drawing. So that tells us that we're standing on this side of the line, looking this way. Okay, super helpful. It's also, and this would be the tricky part, we are going to look at the lay of the land. So that is part of the exercise, is just getting a good idea of the topography in that area. And so this student has drawn that to reflect it. So they knew just from their topographic information that it started at 766 and it ended at 773. And because there's such a good topographic info here, that not that hard to interpret in this below, okay? Now, if you don't have that great of information, there is another way of doing it, and we are going to look at that using Google Earth. But the other things we want to do is we want to be concerned with scale. So if we actually cut along that line and flip the landscape up and look at it, one of the important things that we want to do here is we want to make sure our scale's correct. So we want what's called a 1-to-1. So we want the same scale going horizontally as vertically. And that way the proportion of the land, of the trees here, everything is going to be as it would be if you were standing there. Okay. Now, there are cases, for instance, in civil engineering, when they do grading plans. So they will do a section of a certain area that's going to be graded for development or destruction, however you want to word it. And they use different scales in that point. They will exaggerate either the vertical or the horizontal to try and fit it all in. And again, that is an exception. There we go. That is an exception. This is the ideal where we want 1-to-1. Okay, if you are on a really large, if your project site is say 200 acres, and you draw a section line across the whole site, and you want to get a good feel of the lay of the land, and I totally get it, that would look awesome. You're going to find that all of your landscape elements, your trees, your structures, your whatever you have other than the land that's within that line, you'll find those are going to be just tiny because of the scale that that horizontal line is. So that here, this line represents 254 feet, right? Which is quite long. If it represented 2,000 feet, these trees would be 1/10 the size, and it would be a lot more difficult to get that proportion done properly. So I hope that makes sense. So definitely want to go with 1-to-1. Let's see here. The other thing is we want you to label the heights of some of these major elements. Okay, just approximately. And one thing that's interesting is if we go back and we look at that slide, that's the 2D overhead view, you'll see there's a whole bunch of buildings behind the cut. And if we go here, there's no buildings. So as you get a little more proficient, or you want to um, enhance what you've done with a section map, you could include those. And I've actually seen people include them and gray them out so that they are, it's pretty evident that they're in the distance. Now, the example I'll show you that my wife and myself provided to a client, there's no grain. It's just as is if you were standing there. And there's a reason for that too, because it was for a commercial landscape design. So the requirements are specific for that. The other thing we want to do is below, we want to have our microclimates and how those are situated along that section line. And then, of course, you want your title block at the bottom here, and that is pretty much the case with every design sheet you do. You want to have the site identified. Well, you want to have all these specifics that you repeat on every single design sheet, including your name. Let us see here if there's another example. This is an example of a balcony. I don't think in this class we have any of those to worry about. But yeah, that's a pretty small section drawing. But that's a good example. And if we look at the template file, there's an example within the folder itself. And you can use this sort of format that's grid, a sort of grid layout. So there's no problem doing that. And again, this scale is at a 1-to-1, and that is very important. And there's some more grid layouts people can use, and then the SWOT analysis. So there may be some things that come up in the process that, let's see here. If we go back to that example, let's say we were doing this exercise, and it appears that our structures are right here. Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure why the slide is misbehaving. We know our structures are right here. One of the strengths might be, well, our buildings are on high ground. The likelihood of them flooding is probably zero. One of the weaknesses might be, well, a weakness might be if you are trying to cultivate anything up here, so you have vegetable gardens, it may be a bit drier, right? Your soils may be thinner. Typically, you're going to have erosion over time, and soils will get a bit deeper as you go down a slope. Okay, so that was an example of that. Let me just show you. So this isn't, this is only out of interest, and it's not something necessarily to replicate. But this is a design that we were involved with. So I'm not showing you the 2D overhead, but it was a commercial project, and these houses up here are existing, and this is all proposed. So it was important for the city that this was involved in to have a good idea of how this development was going to affect the existing homes. And they have to, present all this and get public feedback because it was a rezoning process. So this was actually a giant laundromat that was going in for a big chunk of the island where I live. And it was kind of a centralized cleaning area, and you know, you wouldn't want to live here. And not that the site, visually this would look great, but I can imagine the air quality would not be great at all. Um, I'm not sure what they did. This project never got built, funny enough. They spent a lot of money and energy on the planning, and then it never went forward. So that does happen. If any of you go on to design for others and you get into any sort of commercial designing, which, is interesting. It's an interesting process. Um, but it's yeah, it's interesting. We'll say that. It I kind of liked it. I've done a number of them. I liked it from a kind of technical point of view. But it's not quite as exciting as residential work, that's for sure, because they have all these bylaws in place that you need so many trees, so many shrubs in different areas and setbacks and yeah, all kinds of guidelines that you have to follow, which can, constrain your ideas with the design. But in this example, we're showing that all these new trees, what they are going to look like when they're mature. So this is a little different than what we're asking you here. This is proposed going ahead in time, say 10 years. What's the landscape going to look like? Whereas with what we're asking all of you to do with your cross section is to show us what it is today. Okay, so in this section view, the line that we drew goes all the way along the roadway that's at the edge of the property. And all this planting is all new. Same with the building. And these are existing trees. And this was relatively easy for us to do because our software can generate this for us. And we had to do all the work, the 2D work here, putting in the building and all the plantings and etc. But we can flip it on edge and take a look at it in a section view. We could also fly over it in a 3D view, which is pretty cool. But it does take a lot of computing power, and it does take quite a bit of effort to get all this to work. So yeah, so that was just for your interest. We do not actually personally, our business does not do many section views. It's only been in I'll show you another one. We did one in a residential setting here. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to flip back and I'll show you what that site was. So the site we were just looking at, the cross section, here is the overhead view of it. Okay. And you can see these are existing lots. Keep losing my spotlight tool. There we are. These are existing. This is all proposed with parking and plantings along the edge of the street, and then this buffer along this, actually the highway right over here. So this is a substantial buffer, and then the change in grade here. So these are, I'll just flip through this so you get a chance to see it. So there, we can do this. We can go into a 3D view. We can show whatever we want. This was many years ago. Yeah, this was 10 years ago. And this project basically killed my computer. It was so demanding that we had to buy another one after that. I see I got a couple of questions here I better get to. All right. So Kevin has a question here. How do you determine where a cross section would be most useful, where it's not necessary? That is a very good question, Kevin. That has, so let's go. I don't think that section drawing is in this at all. So in the example that I showed you, I will draw a line where that section is. In the example I showed you, well, that's not a very straight line, but that is where my section line was. And the reason that we chose that is it was basically a request from the town of Ladysmith where we were working. So there was no mystery there. Let me show you another example that might help answer your question here. There it is. All right. So this is a small residential project that we did. And in this particular case, here's the dwelling. Here's the dwelling. And in the back of the property, I can't show you photos of it right now, but these are all old railway tie retaining walls. So there was all these rotting retaining walls going along this edge. And what we did was we proposed a new retaining wall. Pull out the old one, put in a new one. You know, that basically had to be done here. I'm just trying to find these. There we go. So in this case, we did a side view of the retaining wall. So to answer your question about where you make a section drawing, in this case, this was really valuable information to know in order for us to properly price and design the hard landscape that was coming in here. So this was basically the line, and then that was the direction we're viewing it on, right? And when we do, and it's not, I do have another example here, but I can't easily get at it. I might try a little bit later. But instead of putting an A and B at the end of each line, our software will return a line up and then place an arrow in the direction of the view. So this goes on the 2D overhead view, and then when we look at it, it would be something like this. This isn't really officially a section view, but it is. It might as well be, because it's a side view of that retaining wall. And here we discovered, well, it's going to be 3'10", and then it's going to go down to about 1 foot at the end, and we have stairs in here. So this is critical in that we're able to determine how high the wall is going to be. And this is the maximum height we could go without going into that engineering phase. Okay. So we want to try and avoid that. And that's something that you might want to consider as you go forward with any work for others. If you're having to put retaining in, be really cognizant of uh, the bylaws that or whatever, or regulations, whatever you want to call them, that govern the area. So here we could not go over 3'10" without getting into engineering. So if we designed a 5 foot high wall and our mason came in and built it, um, and something happened to it, we'd be feeling the heat in terms of liability. So we've done a lot of walls and a lot of very big walls that have been engineered. And it's something that I would not be diving into too quickly. It's a very stressful workflow because you have engineering drawings you have to follow to the T, and then you have to go through inspections every process, every step of the process. They even test the kind of concrete you're using, and yeah, it's a lot of liability. So if we have a little time, I'll go through a few other things here, but you can see the value of flipping the plan on its side is just now this is a little bit of a cheat because with our software, we can create a site model like is shown here so that we can build our retaining and our stairs, and we can know that difference in height between the bottom of the wall and the top of the wall. And that is super valuable to have. You can do that all manually, but it's nice when you got a little bit of help that way. We'll see if there's anything else useful on this drawing. So there you go. We had to do a enclosed vegetable garden. It was one of the add-ons. This is something else you'll probably find if you're designing for other folks. I better get back to my chat here. Sorry, before I go on about this. Okay, Kevin, I hope that answered your question. How thick should the cross-section ideally be? That's from Maggie. Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by thick. Could you explain that a little more, Maggie? Are you talking about the width? Is that what you mean? And you can unmute yourself if you wish, whatever works for you.
Yes, that's what I was wondering is how much information within that cross section. So do I, like if I have a tree and then there's another tree that's like a little bit further east, am I
Uh,
including that in it, or am I just like how narrow of a, does that make sense?
yes, it does. Um, I'm just trying to remember. I have an excellent example of that. Yeah. So you're actually talking about the depth. So if you have your cross-section line, your question is how much of the landscape behind the line that you want to factor in. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, that's another aspect of it.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
guess that is more, I guess that is more of what it is. So how much, because you were talking about building structures, but in
Mhm.
terms of vegetation,
Right,
yeah.
right. Okay, so if we go back to the one I was just showing you here, all we were concerned with here was the wall. And we had to kind of depict it in a linear fashion, even though it is somewhat curved here. This is the actual retaining wall. Where are we? There we are. So this is the retaining wall right here. Oh gosh, there we go. So it curves around, and these are planting areas in front of it. And that was our concern. How high? What's it going to look like? And that gave us a good view. There are a whole lot of trees up and behind, but we weren't too concerned with that. So for your exercise, really, you could play it two ways. There may be a part of the landscape that you're wondering how it's going to look when uh, you go through this process. So we could have done this here. We could have cut a line and shown uh, this narrow bed behind, right? We wanted to get an idea of how that was going to look because there's quite a bit of slope here. And if it was me, I would just show what is in this bed and not worry about what was behind it, right? Because it does add a lot more work. So some of this, I think to answer your question, some of it's going to be based on the time you have. And this is your first time doing this, so I wouldn't take on too much. Um, I would really just focus on what's directly either in front of the line or maybe a short distance back. I've had students that have really, sharp graphic skills, so this didn't take them very long, and they started to include things that were behind, but they grayed it all out, which was a really interesting effect. The image I showed you here, I'm just going to flip off of this 2 seconds as I might have closed it. Yeah, I think I did. Nope. Yeah, I did close it. But in this situation, we showed everything we could from that line backwards because that was our mission. We wanted the town, the people living up here to have a very good idea of what this development was going to look like from the road, right? And then, of course, with that, we have all these other images we had to include, right? That's from lot number 2, right? What would it look like? All this kind of stuff. But for what we're asking you, um, all you need to really do is focus on what is directly behind the cut. And if you want to add some more items, feel free to do so. It's just getting a handle on how to do this. And if you end up having more time and you want to put more effort into it, that's completely up to you. I'm just gonna, I have, oh, sorry about the noise in the background. That's gonna go on for a little bit. I'm just gonna take a look, see if I can see one example here. Be able to find it fairly quick. There we are. All right. So there's a couple of examples here from students that are not up on the template file yet. Let me just get, this person was a graphic designer, so it was very easy for her to, she did a great job with her, I think it was her. All right, so that was her section view. This was a sloping lot, probably a couple acres. No, it was 3/4 of an acre-ish, somewhere around there. And then I think she did 2 section views. That was her first. See if I can see what the difference is here. Okay. No, it's just the same. So this was pretty simple. She focused on the lay of the land first and then added elements in front of it. But you can see where the line is, and she's showing the house that is behind it. So there's some value in that. Absolutely. Now, going outside of the property line wouldn't be necessary, although in some cases that could provide you with some very valuable info, right? But this is what she ended up doing, which is great, and putting some numbers on the height of the trees and of the house itself. So this is a nice example. A lot of people will do a vertical scale bar here as well. You don't have to, but there needs to be some sense of scale. So this was a very nice example. Let me see if now this is an example of a large parcel, and I know there's another question on the chat, which I will totally get to. I haven't forgotten. This was a large acreage. I think it was 500 acres or something. No, 150 acres. And this person did a section drawing, but did not do a one-to-one. So you can see at the bottom here, the bottom line is over 1,000 meters. So that's a kilometer. So, that's about, gosh, I'm trying to put that into miles. Well, we'll say that's probably 1,200 yards, right? It's quite a ways. Uh, so she did that, and then she had to change the vertical scale so that this is all overemphasized. So this is not how the property looks at a one-to-one, but this is how it looks it's probably more like 10-to-1. I'm not sure. I haven't figured that out. But she also included, she has microclimates, she has the different soil types and the succession. So that was interesting. And it's a great example, but this is what you would have to do if you were doing a section line over a massive area. You'd have no choice. Otherwise, um, all of the landscape elements would just, be, imperceptible, right? But you would get a lay of the land. So I don't actually like this because it doesn't give me the feel of the grade of the land. But this is what she wanted to do, and that is wonderful. It's all in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. See if we've got one more here that I can recall was yeah, I'm not positive this. Waiting for Google to catch up here. There we go. So here's an urban, this is kind of typical of what you'd see in an urban cross section where you have, here's the section line, A and B. So we are looking, get my little tool here. So we are looking in that direction, I believe. Let me see. Nope, we're looking in the opposite direction. So we are, yeah, looking that way, right? And that's what she is depicted. So if you really look at it, she's included plants that are behind that line up to the property boundary. That's great. So that tells us a lot. And here's a good case in point. You're doing your SWOT analysis. You could say, I have land sloping towards the house. I would not be crazy about that, and everybody's gonna have little challenges on their project sites. We have some land sloping towards our house too, but we have put in some infrastructure to make sure that the water is never an issue. But that may be one thing. If you see that, maybe I need to be forward thinking about stormwater management and how I'm going to deal with that if we have a record rainfall event. What's going to happen there? So let me go back to the chat. I believe there was another question. So Brittany had a good question here. So you have a large site, and it's a blank canvas with very little elevation change. No, don't put in, I wouldn't put proposed items because we're asking for an as is cross section. So you probably have some vegetation that you'd include. And let's see, so I have something on the slide. So yeah, and the odds are it's not totally flat. No site is. And let me show you, Brittany, do you mind if we look at your site on Google Earth here, and I can just show you something? Would that work for you? Okay. Do you mind, I don't have your file. Do you mind just putting your address in the chat? Sure, no problem. Uh, yeah, if you could just type in there we go. Fabulous. So we are gonna now go to Google Earth, and I will show you a bit of a crude way of doing the same thing. So let us go to Corvallis here. Right. Okay, now I remember, Brittany. So what we could do in this case, your project site's down at the end here, if I'm not mistaken. I'll bring up the chat because I can't see it at the moment. Okay. Right. Yep. Okay. So we could use Google Earth in this situation. And what we do is we are going to create a path. So I'm just waiting. What I might have to do here is show you the whole screen because I have a feeling that I'm going to lose some of this. So let me just stop that share and we'll restart showing my whole desktop. I think that's what we're seeing. Yep. Okay. Because I'm doing this because you would not be able to see some of the dialog boxes that come up. And if you hover over these, they tell you what they are. And I don't use Google Earth a huge amount, but I think this is one of these is the path tool. There we go, new path. So let's say we want to get an idea. Let's say we want to make our section line that. So we click on each end, right? We've created a line, and I can move that line if I want. We can adjust it a bit to suit. And when we get that where we want it, we can come over here and let's say we're going to go OK. And then at the bottom, now it's in our places box on our Google on the left here under places. So I'm going to right click that and I'm going to say show elevation profile. And what it's going to do is as I move my mouse, you can see it correspond with the overhead view here, right? So it's going to go all the way down to the end. But you can see there's some grade change here. So if you didn't have good topographic info, you could basically emulate this line here. You could trace over that and place that into your drawing, provided you scale it up to, provided it's representing that correctly on your drawing. But that's another way of getting a sloped property or a slope line from a property and placing it into that. Let me just see if there's another question here. Yeah, no problem at all. So that's what I would suggest, Brittany, if that's one way of doing it. So we want to see that line drawn. Some people will take a screenshot of this and throw it into their work and say, there's my section drawing. No, sorry, that's not it. That's the grade of the land, and that's what we want to see within the drawing, but we want to also see other elements. Now, I get what you're saying. This is an old field. What you could do if you were wanting to, Brittany, let's say the line was over closer to the property boundary and you wanted to show a little bit of what was behind, you could show a few trees and stuff for perspective. But yeah, this is a case where there's not a whole lot going on. If you want to show a proposed house, you could certainly do that. I'll leave that up to you, okay? It's not a requirement, but maybe when you're putting this together, you may feel that you really want to show where the proposed building footprint would be. So yeah, feel free to do that. Whatever works for you. All right, so I'm going to stop that. Yeah, so I'm not sure how everybody is feeling about that exercise. Is there any questions at all, or does anybody just not get it? And I totally understand if that is the case. It's a tricky exercise. Just trying to think if I have any other. I do have another example I'll look for here while I'm waiting to see if anybody has any. What we didn't do. I didn't see any questions on the document before we started the meeting. No, there are none now. Okay, that's good. Yeah, and I'll just look for this other. We did another, there was another time when we were required to do a section drawing, and that was for a property that was applying for a development permit to make changes to their property where it was close to the ocean. Let's see here if I can find it. Uh-huh. All right, I got one here, and then we'll that'll probably wrap up the meeting. Okay, so this isn't well, that's not quite what I wanted. Oh well, it'll give you an idea. At the bottom of the drawing is the 2D overhead, and we can zoom in a little bit here. We have the 2D overhead, and you can see we've drawn 3 section lines. And with our software, a section line, it shows it in this manner. And it'll also say that this line is drawing number 1 on L 1.0, and that's the sheet we're on. So if we go to drawing number 1 right here, there is our section line. And what it's done in this case is a little bit crude, but the black is showing the land formation and then background of trees, right? Existing trees and the structure. And then we have the same for number 2 and then for number 3. And this for us, this was critical in trying to figure out how to retain this to make it a little more useful for the property owners. This is a slope analysis of that same area, and tough to read it, but red is everything over 50% grade, and then it goes down to less than a 1%, and that would be the blue. So we're in the ocean now. And this is where the house is, way up here. So that is a useful, this is something that Vectorworks can do, and it does an okay job. QGIS does a way better job of slope analysis, but it wouldn't provide these other aspects. Let's see here. This is just kind of float around 3D view of the proposed landscape where we're putting stairs and a dry set stone wall at the bottom to retain, to cut the slope down. So not sure if I had it in the first one. There we go. So, I mean, it may be hard to see, but what we did was and this is our software lets us do that, measure the slope between two lines. So here we know it's 2.3 to 1. So we know between, 2 to 1 and a 3 to 1 slope is safe and comfortable to work on. 2 to 1, you're getting there. And then over here, we're at 1.7, 1.5, 1.6. These are, you're not working on this. So if you want to vegetate that, like, it's going to be very difficult uh, to do so. So hence the plan of retaining it, and then is changing those slopes. So now we're at 1.9. We're still at 1.7 here, but we're getting to a point where people could safely work on that slope if they had to, planting and weeding and mulching, or it was all going to be native material. They're just trying to um, basically rehabilitate it. Wilford has a question here. Which software? I think, ah, I think you're referring to which software do I use when measuring slope? Uh, I use Vectorworks Landmark 2023. Actually, they just brought out the new version 2024, which I have. I'm not using it yet. I usually wait a little while till I start using a new version because they have all the bugs they have to work out of it. But it's a very powerful software. It will create site models like we did here, and it will do all kinds of things, including measuring the degree of slope. You could do that manually. It's just, it would be no fun. So, not sure what this one was, just a little detail on the wall. And again, this is another case where we are saying, okay, let's put in a dry stacked wall. And I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with dry stacked walls, but there is no concrete or mortar or anything involved with it. So it has limitations to what it can withstand in terms when it's a retaining wall, what it will withstand. And basically, I believe our maximum height here was we have a batter, so the slope. And I think the maximum height we determined was like 3 feet. There we go. Maximum wall height, 3 feet. So anything over that is risky. And again, when you're looking at walls, be super careful with that. And the reality is we've had liability insurance to do all this stuff, which was worth it. And now I think last year our liability was something like $6,000. It was completely insane. So we are no longer doing retaining walls, to say the least. Not like that, anyhow. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but it looks like we're at the end of our meeting today, and I hope it's been helpful bringing a little bit of clarity to this exercise. Um, if for some reason, and I'm just going to put it in the link here. If for some reason you're going through this exercise and you just, it's baffling, you just can't get it, then there we go. You can, if you feel you're at a dead end, you can book a quick Zoom meeting with me and I can point you in the right direction. But I would think that most of you should be in a good spot right now for going forward with that. So yeah, so thank you all. Thank you, Kevin. That was very nice of you. Yeah, Google Earth is great for that, especially on bigger sites. And yeah, you're welcome, Michelle and Maggie. So thank you all for taking time today to be part of the meeting. It's great to see you all, and we'll really look forward to seeing your assignment next week. And I hope you have yourself a great week and take care. So we'll see you all later.